Before we begin, I want to talk about the state of affairs in the United States. In the past few weeks, we've heard lots of poli-sci terms to define where we are or to warn about what's happening to America. We've heard oligarchy, autocracy, constitutional crisis, pseudo-monarchy. But the most apt description of what has happened over the past few weeks is tyranny, the unrestrained exercise of power or authority. And the United States is subject right now to acts of tyranny. And let's keep in mind that the US is the world's oldest continuous democratic nation. Not the second, not the third, we are the oldest. And despite the behavior coming out of Washington, D.C., most of us remember that America was born of a rejection of the arbitrary rule of its monarchical leadership, also known as tyranny. One of the ways that our founding fathers and mothers organized themselves to create this grand experiment in governance was by writing and reading about it. They didn't simply stew about what was happening. They wanted to understand it, they wanted to share it, and they wanted to plan what could happen next. So I'm going to invite you to join me in having a conversation about where we are, how we got here, and most importantly, how we navigate out of it by joining me in a recommended read from Assembly Required. This first of its kind recommended read is going to be On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. This book is a short one, but it is very packed full of history and examples, and I think hope. I think it will help us understand, confront, and resist the seemingly inexorable rise of abuse of power in our nation. Over the next few weeks, I'm going to highlight some of its key lessons, but I'm hoping that as I do so, you're reading along with me, that we're doing this exercise of engagement together. And I hope that you will get as much from this book as I did. It's, again, a fairly quick read, but it is worth every word. The reason I want to talk about tyranny is that one of the markers of tyranny is the fracturing of the rule of law. At the federal level, we have three branches of government: legislative, Congress; executive, the presidency; and the judicial, the courts. And they are meant to serve as a check on one another. That's how our system has lasted for so long. But Donald Trump is acting like the presidency means that he, and he alone, has power over the entire federal government. So we've seen a collapse of the intention of the presidency acting in its best interest of the people. And so far, Republicans who control Congress, that second branch, they have been not only willing to bend to Trump's intentional abuse of power, they have essentially given up their own power. The list grows every day. They've abandoned the power to control government spending, the power of oversight, the power to create and dismantle agencies, the power to make laws. Whether or not we should have a Department of Education or whether a president should be able to invalidate birthright citizenship, Congress is supposed to make these decisions, and they have been unbelievably and unforgivably silent. And that leaves the courts, that third branch of government, as our last check on the abuse of power, on the rise of tyranny. It is up to the courts too often these days to make sure that government is following the law and actually serving the will of the people. Yet right now, the Trump administration has been testing the courts and waging war on their power to constrain him. But let's be clear, this is not an accident. It is part of the playbook of autocrats and tyrants. Trump's moves have sparked more than 100 federal lawsuits, and judges have issued a series of nationwide injunctions to block his policies, such as his illegal executive orders to dismantle DEI, his unlawful restriction on birthright citizenship, his move to ban transgender people from serving in the military. And the latest salvo happened on March 15th, when Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. A wartime law used only 3 times in history, always during major conflicts, and he invoked it as a pretext to deport about 250 Venezuelan immigrants with little to no due process. A federal judge ordered the administration to stop and immediately turn around any planes in the air because he didn't just deport them, he put them on a plane and sent them to El Salvador, where the United States has agreed to pay for their incarceration. A judge said stop, and the Trump administration ignored it. When Judge James Boasberg demanded answers about why his judicial orders were not followed, the El Salvadoran president, being paid by our nation to incarcerate immigrants without due process, tweeted, "Oopsie, too late," with a laughing emoji to taunt the judge. And he, in turn, was retweeted by our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Trump then posted that this duly appointed federal judge should be impeached for acting as a check on executive branch authority. Hours later, though, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Roberts, issued a rare statement rebuking the idea of removing a judge from his post because of a disagreement about an unfavorable ruling. Quote, "The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose," Roberts said. This case doesn't exist in a vacuum. This rise of tyranny and this fracturing of the rule of law is not an accident. It is part of a pattern of undermining and testing the limits of the law and the legal system. And it is not new. We can find examples like this in the histories of former democracies that failed, many in the past 50 years. Just this weekend, Trump issued a memorandum that targets law firms that defend causes he opposes and threatens the legal profession of those who dare to protect due process and the people of this country. One of those firms, Paul Weiss, capitulated. They gave in, and more, unfortunately, are likely to follow if we don't speak up. But why does it matter if law firms cave in to save their businesses or if judges have their rulings ignored? How is our democracy tied to the rule of law at every level of government, starting with the federal government, but not ending there? These are the issues we're going to dig into today. We're going to take a hard look at our legal system and break down Trump's biggest legal cases with Skye Perryman, the president and CEO of Democracy Forward, one of the organizations suing this administration over its use of the Alien Enemies Act. And then we'll talk to Mandela Barnes of Power to the Polls about the upcoming Wisconsin Supreme Court race, a contest that could be the most crucial election of 2025. So let's get into it. Skye Perryman, welcome to Assembly Required.
It's great to be here with you.
Thank you for taking the time.
Of course.
So I want to start with a level setting question. And this really, I think, speaks to the moment we're in with the abuse of power, and we'll have many more examples, but also with the response. And I'm going to draw a contrast. So can you talk a little bit about why it matters that Paul Weiss, one of the nation's top law firms, basically apologized to Trump for having done pro bono work against the January 6th rioters and for defending people in the past, and now has pledged $40 million in free legal services for causes that Trump demands they support?
The first piece of this is let's not bury the lead, right? Which is that this is the president and an administration that has no interest in working within our legal process. And so they are trying to intimidate lawyers. They are trying to intimidate law firms. They're trying to intimidate judges. That is what is happening. And this is a time for courage. And we're seeing a lot of institutions meet that moment straight on. And we are seeing other institutions that are weighing a range of considerations and aren't really showing up. And so, at Democracy Forward, we have been watching this. We are encouraging all lawyers, just as the American Bar Association has encouraged all lawyers, every single one of us that swears an oath to the Constitution and that is required in this time to uphold the rule of law to do that. And I think that you're seeing that these intimidation tactics, this is a tactic of the administration to try to divide people, to try to ruin solidarity. And we do see that it was a step backwards for that solidarity.
Why does it matter that you are antithetical to what we just saw? Democracy Forward, it's in the name. But can you talk a little bit about your organization, what you do, and why your strategy right now is to stand up for democracy?
Right. Well, we believe fundamentally the fight for democracy is the fight for people. So we're about the American people. And right now, in this moment, the courts are really important to the American people because we have an administration that does not want to be held accountable. They lied on the campaign trail, said they weren't going to operate by a Project 2025 playbook. Now they're accelerating that playbook and then some. And the place you go to hold your administration accountable and to hold the president accountable in this country right now is the courts. And so at Democracy Forward, we are just proud and honored to be on the front lines every day. So we believe that there's no better work in this time and that there's certainly no better calling as lawyers in this time.
Well, we know this administration has had a very broad-based, bigoted, and vicious approach to governing. And part of that has been overwhelmed citizens. It's asinine and pejorative to the media. And it's to fracture how our country ostensibly operates.
Right.
I mean, there is no shortage of issues to tackle. So you've taken on an array of cases. I mean, they've given you a lot to work with in the last, 40 days. Can you talk about and walk us through how you decide what cases to pursue and what you don't take on?
But what we've tried to do in this administration is to take the administration at their word. This is a president that said he was going to try to be a dictator on day one. He said that. And it is a administration that has bragged about wanting to govern by a shock and awe approach. I don't know who really says that about, people that they're supposed to be representing and caring for. That's the act of governing, is caring for people. That's not how this administration's operating. And so we have really decided that the American people are not without an advocate in this, and that when this administration operates unlawfully and harms people, we are going to be there. We want to meet their shock and awe with the American people's voices. And so you see us work across a range of issues, but we're predominantly really focused on how we can make sure that individuals that are going about their daily lives, right, sending their kids to school, going to work and filling out work paperwork that, by the way, is housed at the government. So that means that we go in a lot of different directions. We're in court on behalf of the Baptists and the Quakers and the Sikhs because they want ICE wants to come into houses of worship. I mean, that's not American. We're in court on behalf of people who are being removed from our country without any process at all, because that's a threat to all of us. And then we're in court to protect people's privacy, to protect public education, inclusion, accessibility, all of those things.
Well, I want to dive into those cases with you, but before we do that, I want to ask you about some breaking news that we learned about today, Monday, March 24th, when we're recording. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, used his Signal thread to share war plans and accidentally included the editor of The Atlantic. Is that something that you would take on? And even if you're not going to, can you talk to us a little bit about what the legal implications are for what was just done?
So let me just say that I just came from court earlier today, where you have the United States government standing up into court saying they can remove people from this country without any process whatsoever. And by the way, in the district court have tried to make claims that they may not be able to tell the judge certain things, even in a classified setting, because it is so important for our national security. And yet they're tweeting about that operation. I mean, you see that all over. And then now we have a cabinet secretary in charge of the Department of Defense on his Signal chat signaling war plans. So first of all, let me just say that is not normal. It violates a range of laws and is a threat to our national security. And we are looking at what legal options are available to protect our national security. We actually care about national security here at Democracy Forward. But secondly, when you have people at the highest levels of the government that are signaling war plans. I mean, this is not an administration that is operating at all to further the safety of Americans at home or abroad, and they just want to use that label when it's politically popular for them to use that label to sort of advance an agenda. So we're concerned about it on a whole host of things. We are looking at it. You can't use Signal under the Presidential Records Act. There's a range of other laws that we believe are likely violated here, and so you will see us looking and seeing how we can protect our national security.
Assembly Required with Stacey Abrams is brought to you by Helix. Getting a great night's sleep used to be a little bit of a challenge for me. I often work long hours and I spend a lot of time on the road traveling. And ever since I got my Helix mattress, the experience of coming back to my own bed has only gotten more luxurious. With Helix, I can sleep through the night and I wake up more refreshed and ready to go. The Helix lineup offers 20 unique mattresses, including the award-winning Luxe and Ultra Premium Elite collections, Helix Plus, a mattress designed for big and tall sleepers, and Helix Kid mattresses, designed for growing bodies, endorsed by child sleep experts. So, how will you know which Helix mattress works best for you and your body? Take the Helix Sleep Quiz and find your perfect mattress in under 2 minutes. Go to helixsleep.com/assembly for 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/assembly for 20% off site-wide. helixsleep.com/assembly. Today's episode of Assembly Required with Stacey Abrams is brought to you by Acorns. Acorns is a financial wellness app that helps you take control of your money with simple tools that make it easy to start saving and investing for your future. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that matches you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money you've got right now, even if all you have is just spare change. Financial wellness can be really overwhelming, and when your life is busy, it can be even harder to find time to tackle your finances. Acorns gives you small, simple steps, something we love here at Assembly Required, to get your money on track. Ready to take control of your money? Sign up now and join the over 14 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/assembly or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentives to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/assembly. Well, Skye, you and your team at Democracy Forward have been a beacon of light for so many who are looking for just small victories. And these haven't been small. So I want to talk about a few of them. You know, you got to stay on Trump's order to freeze federal funding via that midnight OMB order. You blocked the administration from entering, as you mentioned, houses of worship indiscriminately to conduct immigration enforcement. You were embedded deeply in the conversation about the deportations. These have been good. Tell us why these lower court rulings matter. We know that they're going to have to go through appeals court and to the Supreme Court, but let's talk about why these victories at the district level matter.
Well, first of all, they matter because they improve, of course, with us, it's always going to be about people. So they improve the lives of people. So that funding freeze, which they want to call it a spending freeze because I think they feel like that is somehow politically viable. What it was an essential services freeze, and people were going to wake up the next day not knowing if they could operate Meals on Wheels, not knowing if the Head Start centers were going to be open, not knowing if their small businesses were going to get the credits that they needed to get, and it would have devastating impacts for everybody, people in red states, blue states, purple states, big cities, small towns, and we were able to go into court on behalf of people and stop that across the nation. Last week, we were able to go into court and stop Elon Musk and Doge from accessing your personal data at the Social Security Administration. So these things have a real impact on people's lives. But the reason that they're also important is that it shows people, I think, and it demonstrates the tools that we all have as Americans. We don't live in a country where there's a king. He may want to be a king, but we all have our rights. And the place you go to enforce those rights when the government is violating them or when others are violating them is to court. And so we are really pleased that in this moment, while it is a very scary moment and it's hard for so many of us and so many people across the country, people are able to make their voices heard and to defend their rights. And it's working, which is why, of course, the president is engaged in an effort to intimidate lawyers, to intimidate judges, and to try to really stop the American people from defending their rights in court.
So I want to stay with this for a second. You have won favorable rulings, as we've just discussed, but you've also lost at the district court level. And for those who think that those losses mean that you shouldn't have tried or that it signals some grand defeat, can you describe how you determine the circumstances where legal action is the best strategy. And I want to contextualize it in this moment because I think for so many of us, we hearken back to the days of Brown v. Board of Education, of legal cases that transform society. And I think part of the reality we live in now is that it's not necessarily about our rights being asserted and protected in these and progressed. It's about protection. And so can you talk a little bit about why even
Sure.
not winning is an okay thing?
La bola de cristal de la soñadora. En algún lugar de Springfield, Ohio, una niña migrante haitiana y su madre acababan de recoger bayas frescas, nueces, dátiles y frutas para los ancianos del pueblo. Con el dinero que ganaron, se dirigieron al mercado con entusiasmo, planeando comprar verduras para un delicioso estofado de venado que la madre estaba preparando esa noche. Pero cuando llegaron, se encontraron con una escena caótica. Una multitud de partidarios trumpistas, con banderas de una era pasada ondeando en el aire, acusaba falsamente a la madre de ser una sirvienta o mascota de la gente del pueblo.
Para más información haga clic en el enlace del árbol en el perfil.
The Future, Daughters of Liberty, A Southern Redemption. In the year 2035, a decade after the turbulent implementation of Trump's Project 2025, the Deep South was in chaos. The government-sanctioned trafficking and oppression of marginalized Americans, fueled by systemic poverty, racism, and gender discrimination, had become a dark and horrific reality. Kamala Harris had risen as the nation's beacon of hope, ultimately defeating Trump in a fierce battle for the soul of the country. Her victory brought an end to the Second Civil War.
For more, click tree link in profile.
A Dying Planet, The Last Harvest. Chapter 1, The Village and the Forest. In the year 2060, the planet was dying. Everywhere you looked, the land was scorched, rivers dried up, and the air was thin, barely breathable. Yet, in a small fishing village by the sea, there was still one last forest. It had somehow survived the waves of destruction that had swept over the earth. It was small, hidden, and sacred. No roads led there, no developers had touched it yet. June and Win, two girls no older than 9, were the last children in the village.
For more, click tree link in profile.
The Baker and the Handyman's Sweet Connection. In a quaint village nestled in a picturesque valley, there stood a small house in the shape of a mushroom. This whimsical home belonged to a young boy named Jamie, barely out of high school, who had a passion for baking. Inside, his cozy kitchen was always filled with the sweet aroma of cakes, cookies, and all sorts of delightful treats. What made his creation special was that each of his cakes was shaped like tiny mushrooms, a nod to his quirky home. Jamie's baking became the talk of the town. From birthdays to celebrations, everyone in the village adored his sweets.
For more, click link in the bio.
I told you. What did I tell you? Didn't I tell you? 'Cause I told you. And when did I tell you? A long time ago. And what did I say will happen when I told you? Exactly what just happened.